It is not true that a planet in the habitable zone is automatically a habitable planet. The label sounds reassuring, because it seems to offer a physical guarantee. At the right distance from its star, water can remain liquid, and where liquid water exists, life, at least in principle, might take hold. The reasoning seems sound, because it rests on a solid, Earth-based intuition. The problem is that the same intuition becomes fragile the moment you shift your gaze to small, cool, restless stars, where the right distance lies so close that the promise can turn into a risk. This is precisely where a system about 40 light-years from Earth began to behave like a living paradox. 7 planets, all rocky, all roughly Earth-sized, compressed into an orbital space so tight that, if you overlaid it on our solar system, it would fit well within Mercury's orbit. 3 of those worlds lie in the region where the energy received could allow liquid water, and the instinct is immediate, to imagine oceans, clouds, perhaps continents. But there is a constraint that unsettles the picture from the start. These planets always show the same face to their star. Eternal day on one side, eternal night on the other. And along that boundary, along that permanent twilight line, the idea of a stable climate stops being obvious. The star at the center is tiny compared with the Sun, an ultracool dwarf. Dim, extremely compact, yet capable of dominating the atmospheric fate of its nearby planets with a deceptive combination of traits. On one hand, precisely because it is small, it makes planetary transits easier to measure. When a planet passes in front of a reduced stellar disk, it blocks a larger fraction of light, and the signal becomes clearer. On the other hand, that same smallness compresses the habitable zone into a narrow ring pressed tightly against the star, pushing the planets into extremely rapid orbits. Days, not years. This is an enormous advantage for observing them, but it is also the reason they become prisoners of synchronous rotation. Like the Moon with Earth, only far more extreme. The discovery itself has an almost mechanical flavor, as though it had been written to be revealed by the transit method. Small automated telescopes monitored the star for weeks and months, searching for periodic dips in brightness. At first, they seemed to reveal 3 planets. Then the light curves began to grow complicated, like an orchestra suddenly revealing new instruments. A transit did not correspond to a single object, but to a more crowded choreography. Longer and more precise observations, especially in the infrared, resolved the confusion. The planets were not 3. They were 7. And not 7 easily detectable gas giants, but 7 small, compact, dense worlds. The kind of planets that, elsewhere, tend to hide. There is another detail that makes this system almost unsettling, because it seems to contradict basic dynamics. 7 planets packed so closely together should disturb one another until chaos sets in. Orbits stretching, collisions, ejections. Instead, the system is stable, thanks to an elegant mathematical structure, orbital resonances. Their revolutions around the star are not random but interlock in simple ratios like gears. When one speeds up slightly under the gravitational pull of a neighbor, another interaction soon afterward tends to compensate. The result is not only stability, but also information. Those tiny advances and delays in transit timing, amplified by the resonances themselves, become a way to weigh the planets. You do not see them as spheres with continents and oceans. You feel them through gravity, the way you sense an object in the dark by the way it shifts the air. From masses and radii you derive density, and density tells a story. These worlds are not balloons of hydrogen and helium. They are rock and metals, perhaps with volatile components, perhaps with water, perhaps with active mantles. But here comes the question that cuts every enthusiasm in two. Do they have atmospheres? Without an atmosphere there is not enough pressure to stabilize liquid water at the surface. No protection from energetic particles from the star. No climate cycle capable of redistributing heat between the day side and the night side. And above all, there is no broad chemistry. the kind that mixes and remixes molecules long enough to build complexity. The point is that around an ultracooled dwarf, an atmosphere may be a temporary luxury. In their early stages, many of these stars are more active and, proportionally, more aggressive. Flares, ultraviolet radiation, stellar wind. If a planet is close, its atmosphere can swell, heat up, and then escape into space atom by atom. And if you lose hydrogen, you also lose water, because chemically water is an elegant way of hiding hydrogen. This is where the James Webb Space Telescope enters the scene, not as a magic wand, but as a sensor capable of detecting details that were once only hypotheses. Its strength lies in infrared spectroscopy. It does not simply measure how much light arrives, but how that light subtly changes color. When a planet transits its star, a fraction of starlight passes through the highest layer of the planet's atmosphere, if one exists, and certain wavelengths are absorbed by specific molecules. Each molecule leaves a signature, a fingerprint. It is a powerful and delicate method, but it does not promise immediate certainty, because it works with extremely faint signals and with models that must disentangle what belongs to the star, to the instrument, to noise, and what belongs to the planet. And indeed, just when it seems we are on the verge of obtaining a clear answer, the system changes register. For some planets, the data indicate that a thick atmosphere rich in light elements is unlikely. For others, the door remains slightly open. And in one case, the most intriguing among those already analyzed in depth, the most important information is not a spectacular discovery but an exclusion. It is not a world wrapped in hydrogen and helium like a miniature Neptune. It is, by nature, closer to a terrestrial planet. But a terrestrial planet can be an airless desert or a world with a dense, oppressive sky. And this ambiguity is the real engine of the story, because it forces us to rethink what habitable truly means when the day never ends and the star is far from quiet. The innermost planet is the first test case. It lies so close to the star that the energy it receives could melt its surface in some scenarios, turning it into a world of incandescent rock and flowing lava. More like an extreme version of Mercury, perhaps with a mantle still tormented by tidal heating. If the system is in resonance, gravitational perturbations are not merely a dynamic ornament. They can turn into internal friction, slightly deforming the planet with each orbit and heating it from within, much as happens with a volcanic moon in our own solar system. In this picture, an atmosphere might have been stripped away, leaving a bare crust, or it might be continually replenished by volcanic gases. And here spectroscopy does not deliver a definitive yes or no, because two opposite scenarios can produce similar signals: a hot rocky surface emitting infrared radiation in a particular way, or a dense atmosphere absorbing and releasing energy with its own signature. In other words, it is not enough to see the planet. You must understand what, exactly, is making it glow in the infrared. The second planet pushes the temptation to compare even further. In size and received energy, the natural analogy is Venus, our clearest example of how a rocky planet can become inhospitable beneath a blanket of carbon dioxide. A Venus-like atmosphere is a furnace, enormous pressure, runaway greenhouse effect, acidic clouds. Yet the available data suggest that if such an atmosphere once existed, it may no longer be there, or it may have been reduced to a thin remnant. This marks an important conceptual shift. It is not enough for a planet to form with volatiles. It must manage to retain them for billions of years under the relentless hammering of an active star. If the star is ancient, and these systems can be, then time works against dense skies and in favor of stripped surfaces. As you move outward to the more distant planets, the story grows more complicated because the possibilities multiply. One of them sits near the edge of the temperate zone, where a small change in atmosphere or in albedo, that is, reflectivity, can shift the climate from, perhaps water, to permanent ice, or to runaway vapor. Here the results, while still suggesting thin or absent atmospheres, do not close the case as decisively as they do for the inner planets, because the physics leaves more pathways open. And then there is the planet that falls in the heart of the habitable zone, the one many people have turned into a symbol. If there is a place in this system where a stable climate might exist, it is there. That is why the most recent analyses have attracted so much attention, and so much confusion. The confusion arises from an implicit expectation that a telescope this powerful should see an atmosphere the way we see a cloud. But reality is subtler. Webb can say with considerable confidence whether a planet is wrapped in a blanket of hydrogen and helium, because those swollen atmospheres leave large signals. If instead the atmosphere is composed of heavier molecules, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, limited amounts of water vapor, or if it is veiled by hazes and aerosols, the signal changes and may become harder to interpret. In that case, the most solid information is often negative. We can rule out certain scenarios, but several models may remain consistent with the data. And yet it is precisely this non-answer that tightens the circle around the right question. We are not searching for a perfect planet. We are trying to understand which atmospheres can survive around the most common stars in the Milky Way. For the planet in the heart of the temperate zone, what emerges most clearly is that it does not appear to be a small world wrapped in extremely light gases. This is crucial, because an envelope of hydrogen and helium would make the surface, if it exists, unreachable for Earth-like chemistry. But the absence of a light atmosphere does not mean no atmosphere. It may mean that if there is a sky, it is made of heavier molecules, harder to strip away and therefore more plausible over long timescales. In that case, even a moderate amount of carbon dioxide could provide enough greenhouse effect to prevent total freezing on the dark side, especially if the atmosphere can transport heat from the eternal day to the eternal night. It becomes a matter of global circulation. Winds that never stop, convective cells permanently active above the substellar point, and a transition belt, the terminator line, that might be the only place with relatively gentle conditions. But the same geometry that offers this possibility also creates a risk, the ice trap. If the eternal night is too cold, water can condense and settle as ice, accumulating for immense spans of time until the night side becomes a freezer that locks away the ocean. Avoiding this requires energy and transport. It requires an atmosphere dense enough to move heat, or a global ocean deep enough to redistribute it through slow but steady currents. And it also requires that the star, with its flares, not destroy this climatic engine before it stabilizes. That is why, when one reads definitive statements about the life, or death, of these worlds, a step has almost always been skipped. The climatology of a synchronously rotating planet is not a minor detail. It is the main story. There is another layer, often overlooked, that Webb is helping bring into focus: the role of hazes and photochemical chemistry. In atmospheres illuminated by an active star, radiation can break molecules apart and recombine them into more complex chains, creating aerosols that veil the spectrum and alter temperature. A haze can cool a planet by reflecting light or warm it by trapping infrared radiation, depending on its composition and altitude. The result is that two planets with similar parameters can diverge dramatically. One may become a greenhouse world, another a frozen desert, another a bare sphere of rock, even if, on paper, they occupied the same zone. And when an analysis proposes two opposite scenarios for the same planet, both still compatible with the data, it is not showing weakness. It is showing just how thin the boundary is between worlds that, from afar, appear almost like twins. The outer planets of the system, those orbiting slightly farther out and in theory less battered by their star, may be the most promising for that very reason. They receive less energy and might retain an atmosphere longer, but they pay a price. If the greenhouse effect is insufficient, ice dominates. Here the question becomes almost surgical. How much carbon dioxide is needed to keep temperatures above freezing on a synchronously rotating planet? How much water can remain without being photo-dissociated and lost to space? And what fraction of the energetic radiation emitted by the star penetrates to the upper layers, where it can accelerate atmospheric escape? These are not questions solved with a single observed transit. They require sequences of data, comparisons, models that include stellar variability and the physics of atmospheric circulation. In this sense, Webb's most drastic contribution has not been to promote or reject the system. It has changed the kind of ignorance we have. Before, the ignorance was total. We did not know whether these planets had skies, nor what they were made of. Now the ignorance is constrained. We know which scenarios are unlikely, which remain plausible, and above all we know that the idea of 7 miniature Earths is a dangerous simplification. They are 7 rocky planets, yes, but in a natural laboratory where the star is different from the Sun, the distance is different, the day is different, and atmospheric history is a continuous struggle between supply and loss. And so the question about life shifts. It does not become, is there life there, which is premature, but rather, what conditions allow a stable environment to persist, because stability, in astronomy, is rare and precious. An atmosphere must survive the first billion years when the star is more aggressive. An ocean must avoid evaporating entirely or freezing forever. A planet must possess some form of geology that recycles carbon and regulates climate, or be fortunate enough not to need it. And in a system like this, where the planets are in resonance and constantly interacting, even internal heat can become a factor. Too little and the planet goes cold, too much and it becomes a volcanic hell. The habitable zone alone says nothing about any of this. It is only the starting point. There is one final element that makes this system irresistible to observers: distance. 40 light-years, in human terms, is an almost absolute barrier, but in astronomical terms it is the neighborhood. It means the light we collect is relatively abundant, that every improvement in instrumentation translates into sharper detail, and that the system will remain a privileged target for decades. Not because it must deliver a confirmation of life, but because it forces us to measure the limits of our ability to infer. It shows us how easy it is to confuse a word, habitable, with a conclusion. And it forces us to replace imagination with physics. If one day we truly know what lies on the surface of one of those planets, we will know it because we have learned to read tiny signals without turning them into slogans. We will know it because we have understood how an ultracool dwarf behaves over time, how often and how violently it erupts with energy, and how that energy sculpts atmospheres. We will know it because we have compared transits, secondary eclipses, thermal variations, and perhaps even crude maps of the day and night sides derived from infrared light. Each step is slow, and precisely for that reason it is solid. It does not build a myth, it builds a catalog of real possibilities. And perhaps the most important lesson is that even if we ultimately discover that many of those planets are bare, or wrapped in unsuitable atmospheres, it would not be a failure. It would be proof that the universe is not obliged to reassure us. That rocky planets may be common, but the conditions that make a surface truly stable, wet, protected, and chemically fertile may be far rarer. In other words, a system this close and this rich is not a guaranteed winning ticket. It is a testing ground. And every piece of data that closes one door illuminates another, not the door of vague hope, but the door of understanding. When we finally learn whether one of those worlds can hold on to a sky for billions of years, we will have learned something that applies to countless similar stars scattered across the galaxy. And that is where the initial paradox truly completes itself. The habitable zone was never an answer. It was only the beginning of the right question. If you've made it this far, it means you love curiosity as much as we do. If you enjoyed this journey, leave a like, write a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what we do. Your presence truly makes a difference. Until the next exploration.